Hello, everybody. Welcome to Free Kiwis. Today, we're delighted to have with us Helen Joyce, who is the Director of Advocacy for an organization called Sex Matters. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Can you tell us just briefly what Sex Matters is and what you do there?
Sure. It was founded as a campaign group, a non-profit, and it became a charity quite recently. It advocates for sex-based rights in law and everyday life. So the two sexes, male and female, are objective reality. They're biology. They're not self-ID. And when you replace them by self-identified categories or government paperwork, you destroy quite a lot of people's rights, especially women's rights. And we're advocating to get back to the objective reality.
So what kind of sex-based rights are you talking about, just for clarity?
I mean, the obvious one that people think of is single-sex spaces, but there's quite a lot more than that. There's, quality medicine, healthcare in general, women's sport, places like rape crisis centres, allocation to prison. All of these things require you to track who is male and who is female.
Right. The prison one has always struck me as being almost an order of magnitude the most important, because when people are put in prison, by definition, they have no choice. They're being put in confinement, and it's astonished me, especially some of the things that have happened in the UK, where rapists have been able to call themselves women at the point of conviction and then be allocated to women's prisons. That it seems that we have entered a very, very dangerous and weird space when that is seen as legitimate.
Yeah, and the UK isn't bad on this. You're pointing to cases in the UK because we're reporting better on it than anywhere else. It's much, much worse in Australia and Canada and across the United States.
Right.
Horrific men have been put into women's jails, men who raped and murdered and tortured women.
And this is still happening?
This is still happening, yes. It's happening in Scotland, in the UK still. There are some men in the women's prison estate in the rest of the UK, but they're in a separate wing. That's still not okay. They mingle with the general population during the day. But in Scotland, they're held as if they're women.
Right.
I think too that it's one of the most egregious things, and it was the first thing that made me think, this is so bad. And I found that people fall into two camps. A minority of people instinctively understand that this is grotesque, and the majority just don't care. They don't care about prisoners, and they don't care about women prisoners or male prisoners. They just think to themselves, they're bad people, and I don't care what happens in prison. If you did a crime, you deserve what you get. But we are meant to live in a civilized society where we have the rule of law. And yes, they're bad people, but that doesn't mean we do things like pull people's fingernails out or whatever, anymore.
Well, of course, the punishment is being put in prison. Once you've been put in prison, you've got your punishment.
Yeah, and you're in the state's care as well.
And certainly being subjected to sexual attack is not something that ought to compound a prison sentence.
Yeah, and of course it happens a lot in men's prisons.
Of course.
And that is one of the things that has driven this in the United States, is that men who present themselves as a woman, especially the ones who have feminized their bodies, are at greater risk in men's prisons.
Right.
But men's prisons should be set up to accept the fact that lots of men are at great risk in men's prisons. Gang members, paedophiles, former police officers, young gay men. They're meant to be able to manage all these risks. This is just one other. And instead they decided to accept those men's identity claims and move them into women's spaces as if we're some sort of buffer zone for men. We're there to provide safety for some vulnerable men instead of being our own group.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a really interesting case because it's pretty clear that there's a danger from men who have sometimes been convicted of rape and sexual assault. Let's take it down a notch and talk about another really controversial area, which is changing rooms, washrooms, bathrooms, whatever you call them. So I suppose the debate there is that one side sees it as unacceptable to have basically people with penises in the same space as women, and the other side sort of says, well, yeah, you're exaggerating a bit. The rate of sexual assault isn't going to be that high. I'm just going to, I'm a trans woman. I'm just going to be changing in my own private little area in the corner or something, and you don't need to look at it. And so, What do you say to that perspective?
Okay.
Women are exaggerating it.
Assuming someone, for example, has had surgery and they present physically in a more female-looking way.
That's another case. Maybe they don't even have a penis.
I mean, a castrated man is not a woman.
Agreed.
And he still looks like a man when you're not looking at his groin. And I don't really want to check people's underpants when I work out who should be in the changing room with me. We tell what sex people are when they're fully dressed by looking at their face, their body, their size. There's thousands of things that we instantaneously recognise somebody's sex. So if you allow in men who have had surgery you're going to allow in men who haven't had surgery, because we literally do not have the underpants police on the door of these places. The only way we can keep out, all men is to keep out all men, every single one of them. And also, that's a very high bar you're setting for distress in a changing room, is that somebody has actually been sexually assaulted. Changing rooms are mostly about privacy and dignity. Safety is like the sort of the third, the highest element of them. Most women, most men actually as well, feel differently about undressing in front of strangers of the opposite sex compared to the same sex. That is the reason that we have these spaces in the first place. Safety is sort of very important but secondary. We have them in the first place because we care about who we undress about in front of and who we're vulnerable in front of. If we didn't, we wouldn't have changing rooms at all. Ask yourself why we don't just get changed out on the street or in our offices, strip off there. We go into single-sex spaces because we care about privacy.
Well, it's kind of interesting because around Wellington and around London, I'm sure, and lots of the developed world now, you see these spaces. Like there's a food court near here where there's 3 bathrooms. There's a male bathroom, female bathroom, and there's like I think it's called all genders bathroom. And you go in and they're just individual cubicles and anybody can go there.
Yeah.
And even with that, I sort of think, I don't really want to be like defecating next to a woman. I don't know.
Many people say this.
Thing. It's like,
no, I know. We feel differently about the same sex and the opposite sex. This is normal, and it's in all societies. Obviously, the levels are different. Finnish people and German people strip off at the drop of a hat, and a Muslim woman or an Orthodox Jewish woman will feel really at the other end of the spectrum on that. But in a pluralistic society, we're meant to accommodate all sorts. We're not meant to say to some women, oh, your religion, which is actually not, a world religion, a major religion, is so backward that you don't feel like the Germans and Finns do about your body. But the other thing is that men and women do have different plumbing, you may have noticed. And this has consequences for going to the toilet. And if women and men share toilets, as opposed to the men using urinals in large numbers, with some regularity, men pee on the seats and floor. And that is very unpleasant for us, and it's very unpleasant for the cleaners. So in public spaces, it's just more sensible to get the people who have a hose pipe to use urinals.
Oh, then you just have to impose the German rule that the men have to pee sitting down.
I have to say that
there's no one there to do that in the room.
There's a lamentable decline in the number of toilets that have urinals.
I know, yeah.
And I lament that.
Yes, and especially
although I think my aim is pretty good.
Yeah, but in very high throughput areas, they are the answer. Like in sports stadiums and so on, they are the answer. I travel a fair bit by train, and of course on train space is at such a premium that there's only ever like one toilet every 4 carriages or something like that. Yeah. And honestly, shortly into the journey, they become unbearable, and you have to hover as a woman, and you're trying not to let your trousers sort of get into whatever's splashed on the floor. You wouldn't choose to do this anywhere that space wasn't at such a premium. And sorry, you end up talking about toilets and all of this thing so much. Those single user cubicles, obviously they're the right thing in, say, a cafe where there's just one toilet. That's fine. But they can be very unsafe for women all the same, because they have to have floor-to-ceiling doors, and those doors tend to swing closed automatically, because otherwise you've got like a toilet visible from the main part of whatever the building is. And that makes them easy to push people into, close the door, and then people outside can't see or hear. So there's actually a whole lot of design work that goes into public toilets, and those doors that have a space at the top and bottom allow for people to shout out if they need help.
Right.
They allow you to hear if there's an issue inside. If somebody faints inside or has a fit, if someone's epileptic and has a fit inside, they'll fall. You can see that. When you're inside, you can hear and see if there's someone outside, if you're in danger, and you can't be shoved in by somebody who then closes the door on you. So these sorts of toilets with the floor-to-ceiling doors are very unsafe in places at night and where there's alcohol involved, like in a nightclub or somewhere like that. Absolutely, there should be women-only toilets where women can get away from creepy men and not have the toilet used as somewhere that she can be attacked.
Okay, so as you probably know, we're quite sympathetic to your view and the battle you've had to fight for free speech. I guess we wanted to also ask a set of questions around, if it's true that we're now winning the war in the trans debate, people I think largely now agree that biological sex is biological sex. What do we do with trans people? There are people who seem to feel strongly that they are the opposite sex. They want to live as the opposite sex. They want to dress as the opposite sex. Sometimes they like to have it asserted that they are the opposite sex. Sometimes they want to go into some female spaces. So I understand you're trying to draw a line. You're not allowed to do certain things. What are you willing to accommodate? Like, what do we do with these people who genuinely have been on this journey that they believe they're the opposite sex? Maybe they've had surgery. To what extent can we accommodate them in a liberal society?
Just to supplement that question slightly, the way I see it is there have always been a small number of men, quite a very small number, I would say, who seem to have a genuine dysphoria about their sex, and in the past it wasn't too much of an issue because they were so vanishingly small, and I would say that they at that point it wasn't a fashionable idea to be trans or to be a transsexual or a transvestite, or to use old-fashioned terms. And one might feel some sympathy for them, especially perhaps given that it became such a kind of cause célèbre amongst certain elements of the political spectrum.
So they're two very different questions, and I'd really like to answer them separately. Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so the first one, the answer is simple. It's the same framework as freedom of belief and freedom of speech. So someone who believes either that they personally are not their sex, or that it is possible in some sense not to be your sex, like to have an identity that's different from your sex, that's someone who holds a counterfactual belief. And there's lots of counterfactual beliefs. I mean, flat earth beliefs. We accommodate those in the sense that people should be able to be served in public places, they should get health care, they shouldn't be harassed or discriminated against in general, but we don't say that other people have to go along with the flat earth belief. And we certainly don't let the flat earth belief infect places where it matters to accept that the earth is round. You wouldn't hire that person to run a shipping company. It's exactly the same. If someone wants to hold this counterfactual belief, good on them, go for it. But don't come and tell other people how to use their language, and don't go and destroy institutions that are there for everybody's safety, health, well-being, dignity, privacy. Don't try to destroy data collection on sex, because we all need that, etc., etc. Now, you talked about the idea that there's sort of like a true trans, that there's the tiny number of people who we should accommodate, and not.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying we should accommodate them. I'm saying, I'm saying I think there's a difference between perhaps the very small subset of men who would always, in the 1970s and 80s and so on, have wanted to dress as women and so on.
And the people who jumped on the bandwagon.
Exactly, which has become a norm. And not only the bandwagon, I would say numerous young people who have been almost seduced into this idea that they could be a different sex. And
I agree with all of that. But this is how we got here. We got here by saying their number is very tiny. Most of them have surgery. They really, really want it. We're half of humanity, women. We're really not here to accommodate the counterfactual and disruptive wishes and beliefs of a tiny number of men. That is simply not what women's spaces are for. And we can't distinguish between that tiny number of men and other men. At first, it used to be that the convention was you really had to be either post-surgery or on the route to surgery. But even then, what happened? I mean, I talked to some of the gender doctors who working in the 1980s and 90s. What they would do is they would meet a man, he would basically persuade them that he had always felt like this, but we know now that those patients were learning scripts. They used to share them. They used to tell each other what to say to get the doctor to give you what you wanted. And then the doctor would give you a letter that you could show in women's spaces or to your employer saying, I am under the care of a gender doctor. The doctor has prescribed that I should be using women's spaces. And you would show this to women there. But I mean, that doctor never had the right to do that. And one man destroys the spaces for all the women who use it. Grossly disproportionate impact. And the funny thing is that a lot of those men never went on to the surgery. They just went back and got their letters renewed every year. What you have to understand is that there are many different reasons that someone identifies as trans, and a lot of those men have an erotic fixation on the idea that
the autogonophilia thing.
So when you start to think like this man has an absolute fixation on the idea of himself as a woman, he's fixated maybe on the idea of getting surgery to look as much like a woman as possible, but also he wants to live as a woman because he gets off on that. He needs to go into women's spaces to simulate being a woman. He's co-opting women into his immersive role play. That's not what we're for. We're not support animals. He's going to have to find some other way to satisfy himself. He can do it at home. He can do it with willing partners. If there are people who are happy to call him a woman, he's welcome to ask. If they can say no, that's fine. They can say yes. There used to be clubs where men went and dressed up and enjoyed doing this together, and sometimes they brought their wives. I mean, God bless those wives. But anyway, it's not for me to say how other people run their marriages. This should just not be something that we even consider accommodating. It's not what women's spaces are for.
And you've made the point, I think, both explicitly and implicitly very well, that there are differences between men and women, and obviously there are physical differences. That perhaps a more contentious claim is not contentious to me because I've studied the data, but the psychological differences, the differences in personality, the differences in some kinds of cognition, and I think those things should be taken into account as well. Of course, we need to be a little bit careful because any distribution has overlap, and so to me, on the one side, I wouldn't want to go as far. In fact, it would be wrong to say, "Oh well, women are not as good at mathematics as men because of these cognitive differences or whatever." Because there are women like yourself who have done PhDs in mathematics and made great
Although there does seem to be a different distribution of ability. Like there's
right, but that's the thing, isn't it? So that's the other side of it. To say actually there's no difference at all,
or it's all social,
It is also wrong.
Yeah.
And so. But it's hard to have that conversation in a nuanced way or in an informed way.
It's been made
well,
hard,
I think it's technically hard because you have to be able to explain, we have normal distributions for men and normal distributions for women and they overlap, as much as they overlap. But then we've got all these other variables as well. And once we put those into the mix, we get a much greater separation on the aggregate of the variables than we would get on any one of them. That's a hard conversation to have with Joe Public.
It is, but I just think you can give analogies that help. And I should say I don't find this difficult personally because I've actually spent time thinking about what evolution implies. And there's an expression that's often used about it's a joke about economists. That like two economists are walking down the street and there's a dollar bill on the sidewalk and they walk past and one of them says to the other, "Why did you not stop to pick up that dollar bill?" And he says, "Oh, someone else will already have done so." I mean, that's the idea that the market, clears everything before you even notice it. And evolution is like that. Evolution does not leave dollar bills on the sidewalk. If there is something that that is available to evolutionary, to natural selection, it's basically been done. We've got there. Yeah. So then you think about human beings and you think about the fact that we have perhaps the most difficult pregnancy and the longest neonatal time when the child is dependent of any mammal. And you put that with the fact that, our children, we do much more learning than other animals do. And you think, can it really be plausible that women are basically just like smaller, chubbier men with a kind of grow bag inside them that pops out a baby every now and then, but in other respects is the same as men? That's just stupid. Obviously, being the sex that gets pregnant is going to have consequences for every bit of our body and every bit of our psyche.
That's right.
How could women not be the sex that cares more about newborn babies than men do?
Okay.
I mean, honestly, I've done it. I've given birth twice. You would slaughter the damn things if you weren't so in love with them.
And you'd certainly never do it again, having done it once,
yes,
right?
You don't get any sleep. So there's just going to be differences. And when I talk to ordinary people about this who aren't thinking about it, I don't do all that normal distribution stuff. I say, think about bodies and think about faces. Just think about faces. Like male and female faces, if you look at individual features, especially if a man is clean-shaven and they both have short hair, they're not that different. But every one of them is a bit different. You could never say of a single given mouth that is definitely a man's mouth or a woman's mouth. But put together, we have exquisite certainty in recognising which are male faces and which are female faces, and we can do it instantaneously. Well, it's the same with the rest of our bodies, and it's the same, I think,
with our psyches. In fact, there's research exactly on that. I think it was an Israeli researcher called Rosenblatt, and what he did was to take a whole lot of small anatomical differences between male and female brains and put them into a big kind of data analysis engine, and was able to classify the brains as male or female with 90% accuracy.
Yeah, and I mean, we can do faces to nearly 100%.
And then a few years later, the same research was done with cognitive and personality variables.
Yeah.
And on any one variable, I mean, there were a few variables that are reasonably good predictors on their own, but not anything like 90% accurate.
Yeah.
But when you put them all together, then you do get a really good kind of ability to discriminate between male and female data.
And so one of the things that the trans lobby would say about that is that therefore it's possible to have a male brain in a female body or vice versa, in the sense that somebody's brain is more typically female.
Sure.
Right? But that's like saying a woman who's 6'2" has male height.
Yes.
No, she's just an outlier. She's still
She's a
female.
tall woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with all this. There are sex differences, and they're largely biologically driven. Is it not the case, though, that feminism has led the way in eliding these differences? And so it's interesting that you're probably still a feminist and you're trans exclusionary or you're trans skeptical, let's say. Have you revisited your feminism in this regard?
Not at all, because my feminism never ever involved
There are
denying
different
biological
strands
realities.
of feminism.
Yeah, feminism is a word like Christian. Like Christian covers everything from Southern Baptists to Quakers and a whole load of stuff in between. I don't think you can say feminism itself, Christian, you must at least believe, as Bertrand Russell said, that Christ was at least the best and wisest of men to call yourself a Christian. Like, feminism is the radical notion that women are human. Like, that's the basic of feminism. And my strand of feminism has never involved denying sex differences. However, I agree with you that some strands of feminism have.
Well, let's talk about women's sport, because that's an interesting example, right? Because I feel like a few years ago, a lot of the feminists were sort of implying or saying that women were kind of just as good as men at sport. It was all sort of social differences.
A tiny number of feminists.
Men did get in a lot of trouble for saying, I think John McEnroe was asked about how good Venus Williams was.
Yes.
He said, she'd be like 750th on the list of all-time greats.
Which is
and
true.
He got hounded for that, right?
It's true, but it's a stupid thing to say.
Mm.
It's like saying, how good is that 12-year-old at their sport? Oh, well, if they were playing against 18-year-olds, not very good. Serena Williams was a miracle, an absolute outlier, everything perfect, the most extraordinary sports person it's possible to be as a woman, and we're half of humanity. To say, oh, well, if she was competing against men, she wouldn't do so well. Yes, I know, but she shouldn't be competing against men. Because testosterone does a whole bunch of things that give men what you might call an unearned advantage, just like living another 6 years gives the 18-year-old an unearned advantage over the 12-year-old. We arrange sport in categories so that, everybody has somewhere to be included. If we didn't do that, then sport would just be a competition among prime age, able-bodied men. And that would just be it. There wouldn't be any sport for most humans. So I sort of see why he got shouted at, because it was such a stupid thing to say and so insulting to her. I mean, she's literally better than all those men because she's female, and look at how good she is.
She's not literally better than all those men, right? She's literally worse than all those men.
No. She's literally better at what she's doing, which is playing female tennis. She's a miracle of humanity.
She's literally worse at tennis.
No, I don't think you're saying something sensible here. I think what you're saying is she can't hit the ball as hard and so on. She's playing a different game. She's playing women's tennis.
Well, I think James's argument is that if she was to play...
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
I'm very literal-minded. You have to forgive me. I'm just saying that if you put her on the tennis court with the best men in the world...
Yeah, I know, she'd lose.
That's all I'm saying.
So that's correct. Yeah. So that factual statement is correct. But, I mean, it's just not a sensible statement. Like, take flyweight and heavyweight boxers. Is the heavyweight boxer better at boxing than a flyweight boxer? No, but he can knock him out good and hard.
I mean, I would say yes, but...
No,
I get your point.
Yeah,
it's in some ways it's become natural to think about all these different categories because we use them so often.
Perhaps
okay. Can I try it a different way then? I'll try it a different way. I'll say what a sporting competition is about seeing who is excellent, who excels at whatever it is that sport is about, hitting people, jumping high, whatever, and you want to wash out kind of uninteresting or unearned advantages. So when you're letting children do it, you keep out adults. When you're letting women do it, you keep out men, because it's just not interesting that someone whose biology has been driven by testosterone.
I'm just trying to talk about this moment where you went from a lot of stuff like that with feminists sort of suggesting that there weren't really hardwired biological sex differences that mattered for sport. And then suddenly within a few years you get this movement, which I know that you decry, where all these trans women, i.e. biological males,
come into
are competing in women's sport.
So I have to say it was a really tiny number of people who ever went for an argument as barkingly stupid as that there aren't physiological differences that matter for sport. Mm. I mean, unfortunately, they tended to be women who were what I call professional feminists, women working in gender studies departments and the like. I come from a very, very sporty family. I'm one of 9 kids, and I'm the only one who doesn't play cricket. And when I say play cricket, several of them have been professional. One of my brothers, Ed Joyce, was the captain of Middlesex and Sussex. He's been coaching the Ireland women's team until very recently. He's now retired from playing himself. My sister Isabel was, at the time, absolutely the best Irish women's cricketer. She captained the Ireland women's team for many years, and she played in Australia half the year and in Ireland half the year. So my entire life I have watched what it is to do women's sport and to do men's sport in the same sport. And what you see is obviously sex differences. Like Isabel at one point was so good that she played on the first men's team for our local club while she was captaining the Ireland women's team. But you also saw sociological differences. So, the women flew economy and didn't get paid. The men flew business and got paid quite a lot. And that fed back into their training and how many women were in it. And, there were young girls playing on the women's team because there just aren't so many. And this gives, I don't know what it is about people that they can't just hold a few complex and different ideas together in their minds. Like they focused on just that. Like if you have the same amount of money going into it or whatever. I mean, I just think how stupid, because you just look at their bodies. They're just very different.
Perhaps a scenario or a realm in which this is a bit more blurry would be things like how many women versus men are software engineers and things like this. And I think in particular of James Damore, the Google worker who was sacked for writing a perfectly evidence-based piece on why there are more men in tech than women.
I have a few niggles with James Damore. Obviously, he should not have been treated that way. That was outrageous. And I'm perfectly happy to believe, and I in fact do believe, that you're going to get more software engineers who are men than women in any free society. I mean, this is not a very attractive job for most people. You have to be quite, single-minded and nerdy and interested in just kind of a certain... I mean, and I'm saying this as someone who has a maths PhD.
Yeah.
It's not a job I want. So the two things...
Same would be true of doing a PhD in measure theory, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's funny you saying it's not attractive. I'm thinking, you get to work with abstract stuff. People don't bug you. This is one of the biggest
I like working with abstract
right?
stuff and people don't bug you, but not that kind of niggly, kind of repetitive, like the thing bloody doesn't work because you've put one thing wrong. I hate that crap.
I agree, yeah.
I like big picture maths.
Yeah.
I found that how it happened with maths too, mind you, because if you get one bit of notation out of place, you mess it all up.
But if you understand what you're doing, you don't get the notation out of place. Coding is not like that. I had to do courses in coding early in my maths degree. I hated them. Anyway, the two things I would say about James Damore, starting after saying he absolutely should not have been treated the way he was, and yes, we're going to see more men being software engineers. One is that as someone who did a maths degree, I can tell you there's a lot of sexist discourse in there too. So I came top of my year. I graduated top. I got a gold medal for doing so.
You were the chief wrangler.
I wasn't at the sort of college where we call people that. I was in Trinity College Dublin. And
I see. I thought you went to Cambridge later, though.
I did. I did my master's, what was called Part 3 there. And I can tell you that there was a whole bit of, girls just study harder and she just learns it all off by heart type talk. So any woman who is working in that profession is going to have heard a lot of fucking bullshit. And you get pretty pissed off by it. Mm. So there's first is that. And the second one is, one of the ways that I know there is still significant sexism in the software industry is if you think about what women are like compared with men on average, women are better at talking to other people and all those things that are atypical in software engineers, but might make you a rather good manager. Mm-hmm. So what you should see is that the 10 or 20% of software engineers who are female get promoted more to managerial positions, and you don't. So I think there's still significant sexism there. And the way he wrote it in this, bless him, very Aspie way,
Well, I suspect that was...
But that's okay. We've got to be accommodating of neurodivergency nowadays, right?
Yeah, I know. But, sometimes you're just like, oh, for God's sake. Did you actually talk to any of your female colleagues about what it is like to work as a woman in software engineering?
Well, I'd say he was a pretty data-driven guy, and he worked with a lot of data.
Yes, but I mean,
as somebody who works in public policy, I entirely take your point. But I suppose
I know,
I'm kind of an outlier as a man in terms of my ability to communicate verbally, so I'm lucky like that, I suppose.
I look back at it and I see it as an early example of this thing where some poor random person who just does something the same as they always did and the same that millions of other people do all the time, that maybe isn't perfect, but who's perfect, gets picked as the main character for a day on social media, and suddenly it blows up everywhere. It's a horrific experience. And I don't think people are the same afterwards. It's like being mugged. It comes out of nowhere and you never feel the same. You never feel safe again afterwards.
So, this is something that we asked Kathleen Stock as well. For a while there, at the beginning when woke was first getting strong, I felt like feminism was one of the main things, and it was actually one of the main threats to free speech, I thought.
Completely.
The James Damore thing was one of the first things that sort of lit up. Then there was Me Too, and of course there were some cases that needed to come to light, but I felt like there was also a lot of mobbing in that sphere. So, again, I'm just interested in the sort of TERF movement and how they've been really supportive of free speech, and other people in the free speech movement supported them. But I just wonder, to what extent do you look back now at some of the previous things that feminists, I know you say feminism is a broad church, but do you look back now and think maybe we should have let men speak a bit more? And there's still things that are off, I feel like the idea of men's rights is still seen as an incredibly kind of alt-right thing.
Yeah,
right?
And the word men's rights means, absolutely horrific men doing horrific things to women. But
Some
there
of it
has to be a
does.
meaning.
Some of
There
it
has
does,
to be a
right?
meaning that's good.
But there are
Men
probably
have rights too.
people also who think like, maybe the divorce courts are working against men.
Totally.
I don't know if that's true. I haven't
Yes.
experienced the divorce court, but some people think that, right?
Yes.
Men should be able to say that in public
I mean,
space.
a very good example. Last week, I went to an education conference. Education's my sphere of work, and this was I would say, a fairly radical left-leaning conference. And, because I'm brave and stupid or whatever, I gave a talk about the gender gap in education, which is vastly to the disfavour of boys, especially in things like literacy.
Yeah.
Now, there were a lot of rude interjections and basically a hostile reception. And yet, now we have 2/3 of our university students are women, nearly 2/3. And there's a gap between boys and girls at just about every stage of education in just about every subject. Even mathematics and chemistry in New Zealand are, have small but reliable differences in favour of young women and girls. So that seems to me an issue that we ought to be talking about, but it still seems to be a threat to certain elements of feminism that we raise it.
I mean, we talk about that all the time in the UK. It's now common knowledge that that there's a problem with boys and education, and and it's not just about outcomes. Like, the way school has gone, which is much more about sitting still and and so on, is reliably less good
I've raised precisely this in my talk, because when you look at the research, the first thing to say is that there is no evidence whatsoever that either men or women are better teaching either boys or girls. So there's no individual sex difference in teachers.
Yeah.
But what I contended is that maybe because 85% of our primary school teachers are female and more than 60% of our secondary school teachers are female, that has an effect on the culture of the school, which might make it less conducive for the average boy to thrive in.
Yeah.
And that was a claim or suggestion that was greeted with utter derision.
Which is the kind of point you would probably make about the software industry, right? Like the other way around. That if there's a preponderance of males, then the culture will be of a certain nature, so that women feel less comfortable.
And I mean, that's just kind of obvious, and we've said it in other situations, like, truck drivers. A woman becomes a truck driver, and, the banter has gone way past what's acceptable sometimes. Or policing, it's a hard place for women to work for cultural reasons. No, I mean, we could talk the entire show about education and sex differences, but I mean, anyone who actually looks at children knows they're different. And it's on average, but it's noticeable. Boys are more active. They're born on average half a pound heavier. They're more rigid, less floppy, and they move faster and more. They crawl more. They get into trouble more. And this is not because their parents are, treating them so differently. It's just too big a difference and too reliable. And I mean, I've often thought that you shouldn't be allowed to give a child Ritalin or any of these things until you have tested making him run around for 2 hours first thing every day. And then we'll see how many of them still need Ritalin,
Right.
That's the old boarding school approach.
Because Ritalin is not harmless.
Exactly.
It can affect growth.
And running around is very, very good for you.
That's right.
And reliably, boys want to do it more than girls do. So there's all these differences. I mean, I don't live in a world where this is at all controversial, and I mostly talk to women who call themselves feminists. I mean, I don't know if you're very backward on this in New Zealand.
Quite likely.
I completely agree that a lot of this has been made or attempted to be made unsayable. But I've never found myself in a world where I can't talk about these things. And I think it's really sort of a very American strand of reality denying sort of elite feminism that's driven by, big universities where people talk absolute shite about everything. This is just one of the many things they talk complete shite about. Like to single out idiot discourse on how it's just entirely cultural that women and men have different strengths, okay, sorry, this is a bit of a side issue, but the differences in female and male strength are extremely different depending on which bit of the body you're talking about. So grip strength is one of the biggest, punching power is the biggest.
Upper body in general.
And
throwing
then,
as well,
down you go. And throw anything that uses several bits of your upper body, your back, your shoulders, whatever, et cetera, is bigger. Well, how come if it's cultural, that's the case? Like, what is culture doing more to my grip strength than to my knees? It's ridiculous.
It's been giving you subtle messages that men have more grip and they can throw further.
Oh, stop. There's probably a paper like that. So I just see this as, part of this this strain of academia that came out of postmodernism, and that sadly a lot of women have gone into these bits of academia and they write this nonsense about, the worst one I saw was this pair of academics who went and married a lake. And they talked about shrimp and they videoed it, and it's turned into an academic paper, and you're like, oh God, you look at it and you think, can you please stop letting the women's side down?
We could show you some.
They married the lake?
They married a lake. I mean, just
why not?
Both of them.
We've had a river declared to be a person in New Zealand.
I read an article about it and saw a little video about it.
Who performed this there at Church of England?
I don't know, and I don't care. It was in America. It wasn't in the UK.
Yeah,
I just pick it as an example. There's millions of other idiotic.
No, and it
examples.
should be easy to laugh at these things, but the problem is that, and I'm glad that you find it easy to talk about. It's actually, I would contend, more difficult to talk about as a man because you're more likely to be called, an old white guy or something like that.
Sure.
And,
I mean, and I'm sitting there cringing and saying, would you please stop letting women down by doing this sort of terrible thing in the public domain to these women? I can say it.
Yeah.
And so what I think has happened, and this worries me much more than this sort of brief but hideous eruption of reality denying so-called feminism, is that we now have an unfortunately sort of semi-self-sustaining system whereby women who have been indoctrinated and taught in nonsense are now the people teaching the next generation of women in this nonsense. So to talk about the sort of academic side of it, women do disproportionately do certain courses, sociology, law, gender studies, psychology, and they are now disproportionately taught by women because women were the previous generation disproportionately.
And then others go on to get jobs in HR and other things in companies, and it all starts to infect the wider culture.
Social work, disproportionately the sort of the moral policing jobs in society. And it's interesting, and I say this as the mother of two sons. My sons are both grown up now. And I mean, I watched them in school. They weren't indoctrinated at the same time as their female classmates were. And that's partly because, girls are indoctrinated to be women, right? And boys are indoctrinated to be men. But also, to bring it back to the trans issue, the trans issue, formally speaking, it's symmetric. Either sex can identify as the other sex. But this almost only imposes obligations on women because men aren't disadvantaged by and large when women identify
or they
as
don't
men.
care as much. And because of the asymmetry in body size and other things.
Yeah, exactly. They're not at risk. I mean, a man may feel embarrassed if the women come into the men's toilets, especially if there's a urinal, and men deserve privacy too, to be clear. Like, this is an intrusion. It's just not the same as the man coming into the women's toilets and terrifying all the women, because women know that men who overstep women's boundaries are inherently scary. They're doing a scary thing. You don't know what they're going to do next, So it's completely asymmetric. So if you want to push this agenda on people, it's women you have to push it on. It's girls you have to convince to accept boys as girls. You don't have to do any work the other way around because it's just not going to come up. So it's entirely about indoctrinating girls, and that is, in my opinion, is the big reason why we see a sex difference in support for the trans agenda. It is one of the puzzles that it affects women more,
yes.
But it's women and girls who support it.
You talked about that last evening at your excellent talk. One of the things that occurred to me, I'm not denying that what you're saying is likely an element, but also we know from the personality data that women on average are more agreeable than men, and also perhaps I mean, this is a little bit of a speculation, but if we think about the evolutionary past of the human race, it was the women who were the social cohesion of the tribe or the group, while the men were off doing what men needed to do to keep the tribe alive. Now, I wonder if that's an element in this as well.
I just don't think that this is something that's about social cohesion at all, because it's so
but
that
isn't my point. My point is that there are personality traits that women might have that more than men that make them more likely to feel sympathetic to these people who are purported to be, victims or underdogs.
About the sympathy. I really am. I think that the sympathy, when women show this sympathy, what they're doing is moral virtue signalling. They're showing off to other women about how amazing they are.
Why do they want to do that more than men want to, though?
I mean, I think it is absolutely about different sex differences and evolutionary driven ones. Like, men compete by, not to put too fine a point on it, punching each other getting more money, getting more sexual partners, whatever. Women have to compete in a less aggressive and less physical and less obvious way. So it's about bitching. It's about destroying the other woman's social standing.
Which is why social media is so much worse for young women than for young women.
You have to be much smarter about it, because you have to manipulate other people. But one of the things you do is you look like just a better and nicer person, and you subtly putting down other people. So a woman who says, I don't mind the trans women. I love trans women. You can pee next to me. What she's doing is saying, look at all those other bitches. How nasty are they? Also, I'm not scared. They're saying they're scared because this is something that requires women to say, look, we're vulnerable. Look, men rape us. Look, we're physically weaker. I don't like saying any of these things. It's humiliating. So it's much more fun for some women to pretend that it's not true. So I really don't think it's about being agreeable as such. Part of agreeableness is that women have to placate men. Like, we really do, because you don't want to punch in the face when you're not in an equal fight. So in deep evolutionary time, women are much, much better at de-escalating, at making themselves small, at getting away from scary and difficult people and so on. And that is a huge part of this, because, as I say, a man who comes into women's spaces is an inherently scary thing. And you can go into all sorts of psychological reasons for how you have to try and, suppress your fear, show nothing, smile, make nice, because women do make nice around men who are scary.
Can I just pick up something you said there? So you're saying that it's kind of paradoxical, but it seems to be true that there are a lot of women in the trans movement who are pushing this stuff and supporting this stuff. If that's the case, do you view this movement as misogynistic? Because I hear and see on social media a lot of rhetoric about how the trans movement hates women.
Yeah, I really do see it as misogynistic, absolutely. Just like I saw the opposition to giving women the vote as misogynistic, and there were a lot of women who were opposed to women getting the vote. I see FGM as misogynistic, even though it's women who carry out the brutal, cutting on the little girls. These are institutions that are inherently harmful for women, and that inherently, even though most men aren't asking for it and don't want it, inherently increase men's room for manoeuvre. Like, I hope neither of you ever wants to go into women's toilets, but you can now. It's not a right you want to use, but it's given you a new right. It's given men right to roam.
Can't say it ever occurred to me, but
no, but it's actually really important to think about this, because if you think about what's in men's interests, and I'm talking about decent men who aren't going to use these things, it's kind of better for you if there's just no comeback for bad behaviour. Because what if somebody wrongly accuses you? Or what if you make a mistake and you do something wrong? The fact is now that men can go wherever they like, and they can't be called perverts or told to get out or any of those things. Occasionally that'll protect a decent man who wasn't trying to be nasty. So there's just no good in it for women, and there is marginal good in it for all men, and a lot of good for the worst men.
Take your point. I would say that there's a flip side to this as well, though. I mean, especially in the kind of post-Me Too environment. And, again, coming back to the educational context, arguably one of the reasons why there are not many male primary school teachers is because they're scared of being accused of
being paedophiles.
Yeah. And there was a very high-profile case in New Zealand, 25 years ago. Peter Ellis, he was a childcare worker, and he was falsely accused of doing all sorts of horrendous things to small children, and it was later debunked. But he spent, was it 10 years in prison? He spent a long time in prison.
Terrible.
20 years, a long time in prison.
God.
He served out a sentence. He was eventually released, and he wasn't exonerated until posthumously. He died before he was exonerated. Now, I would say that had a chilling effect on the likelihood of men going into early childhood education.
Yeah.
So I would say, while taking your point, that there are things that, privilege men, whether they like it or not, as it were. I think there are also disadvantages that come with...
I don't deny it at all. I'm just, answering the specific question is this movement misogynistic? I mean, if you look at it in its impacts are really almost solely on women, and it benefits, at least theoretically, all men, and then the worst men get to actually use that benefit.
Yeah.
I mean, on your point about the being worried to be a paedophile sort of thing, like, most men I know would not ever consider walking up to a small child who seems lost and asking, are you all right? Like, what my husband would do is, if I'm not with them, he'll find a woman and he'll say, can you come with me? Look, that child looks lost. Because And I kind of almost think they're right, though, because really nearly all sexual predation on children is by men. And you do have to tell your children this. You have to say, be careful.
By the same token, a vanishingly small proportion of men are...
Totally. So this is very hard on men. Just in that particular scenario, what you wanted to be able to do as a parent, either a male or female parent, I'm not distinguishing, you want to be able to tell your children, if you're lost, find a woman to ask for help. Be careful of men who come up to you and say certain... It's not smart to not say these things to your children. And so good men have to recognise that this is the world that they live in, that it's a world where you don't walk close behind a woman on her own late at night. You cross the road to get away from her, not because you're going to attack her, but because she doesn't know whether you're going to attack her or not. So men should accept that they have to, find that woman to walk with them, to talk to the small child. Now, in a big job like primary teaching, like I'm not saying men stay out of primary teaching, I'm saying that we look at the way that we run the school environment in order to mimic those sensible precautions. So you have things like you should never have the door closed in a classroom with just a teacher and a student inside. And you can make that either sex. Mm. You put glass little panels in the doors so that you can always see into rooms. You build in sensible precautions that are reality-based, that don't tar everybody with the same brush. But at the same time, you have to accept that, like, really, literally, nearly all violence against everybody, men, boys, girls, women, is by men. And we
one thing I would point out that seems to be the case now, and this is not paedophilia in the same sense as it would be with prepubescent children, but there are reasonably regular occurrences in this country of female teachers having affairs with older boys.
Yes, that happens elsewhere too. So yeah, and I mean, in inverted commas, it may be consensual because he's over 16. Right. But it's obviously a power abuse.
Well, and
as it would be the other way around as well, Mm. Yeah, no, completely.
Well, the president of France his marriage seems to have started in that way, I think. His teacher.
Yeah. Yes, it was his teacher, but I don't know that they got together until they were older. I mean, I'm not commenting on that.
Yeah. But it sometimes happens.
Yeah, it does sometimes happen. I mean, obviously it's much more the other way around. But anyway, if we just stick to violence, like, sexual violence or
forced sexual contact,
or somebody who absolutely cannot consent, and I don't just mean in the institution. I think it's right that we accept that there's a power differential within an institution. I just mean generally. So a minor, it's really mostly men.
You mentioned before, I think the way you put it was, boys are indoctrinated to be men and girls are indoctrinated to be women.
Yeah, and maybe indoctrinate was a
Well, I'm interested in that term because, one of the things that I've been thinking about over the past few years is that we don't do enough not to indoctrinate, but to initiate. And to some extent, young women are initiated by their bodies when they get their periods. Yes. There's a clear marker of they're a woman in some sense. So obviously, they're not fully mature at that point, but
it's a rite of passage.
That's right, and this is a very unfashionable view because again it comes back to kind of recognising certain differences between men and women and ways that perhaps young men should be socialised as a result of that. And too often the way I think that we seek to socialise young men is just a bit preachy and sort of telling them off of being toxic masculine or whatever.
Absolutely.
Instead of perhaps cultivating extremely old-fashioned virtues of gentlemanliness or chivalry, these kinds of things, to recognise that you're bigger and stronger and that comes with a privilege and a responsibility, and
you can be proud of it.
And on the other side of it, I would say, when it comes to interactions between young men and women, which are uncomfortable and difficult and awkward, and we all remember that, we're in a culture, and in fact, perhaps again, this is actually biologically built in to some extent, that young men are the ones who are expected to make the advance. Well, first of all, they have to do that in a respectful way and accept rejection. But on the young women's side, maybe, some initiation into the way in which to handle an unwelcome advance without making the young man feel too humiliated would be a good thing too.
Yeah, I mean, let's leave off the last bit of that and talk about that bit separately. But absolutely, it is the case that there's no natural initiation ceremony into adulthood for men, as there is for young women, and most societies have invented one. They've made one, and that suggests to me that there's a purpose to it.
And that requires a male space, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, you learn to be a man by looking at men, and you learn to be a woman by looking at women, and you learn to interact by looking at interactions, if you know what I mean. But we aren't doing any of that. Instead, we're just doing, we're pretending that they're the same, and the result, I think it's part of the way that we're seeing a lot of men dropping out. You can get everything you want on your computer. Your games and your porn and your violence. Not everything. It's soulless.
Yeah.
But so if you don't have some strong expectations that you are expected to act in the world as a man, and that does mean step up, then of course a lot of young men aren't going to do that. And there's just alternatives. We're rich enough as a society now that quite a significant number of young men can live in their mum's basement.
There has to be something in it for them to do that, doesn't there?
Yeah, some pride, some
sense of that's right. Like, if you have a greater responsibility, then to some extent that should come with a degree of respect when you meet that responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said to my two sons that I'd be very ashamed if they didn't help, offer their seat to a pregnant woman. Or, I mean, actually, the offering the seat one is interesting because, if you look back a long time, many women will have been pregnant really a lot of the time, and a lot of the time it won't have been visible. Right. So I do think that the, carrying things for women, offering seats to women, opening doors for women was shaped by the fact that, a lot of the time these women will be pregnant or they're breastfeeding or they've got small kids with them. Like, why would you not do that as the unencumbered, larger, stronger human being?
Yeah, that was kind of discouraged, though, as sort of benign sexism, right?
Yeah. So when I was having my second child, I was commuting into London and I worked right until he was born. And I can honestly tell you, literally not once ever did a man offer me a seat on public transport. Not once. Women did, because they know what it's like to be pregnant. And I just thought, I don't want to bring a child up like that. Like, I mean, I was enormous. There was no question about whether I was pregnant or not. It wasn't like, oh God, am I going to offend her? She's just fat,
Well, I think, though, the story we've been told is also that, like, women are capable. Which is obviously true, but, like, women are always capable. They never need any help. And if you offer help to them that way, it's insulting. It's kind of patronizing. Yeah. They can open the door for themselves.
Yeah, and what a convenient thing if honestly you can't be bothered, So it's both. It's you say this, and then men are like, oh, that's fine by me, Like, well, I'm not going to push it if you're not.
Speaking for myself, there's a part of me that quite enjoys the chivalrous act, especially when it's appreciated. And to me, it's not in any way looking down on a woman if I open the door for her. And I can't say exactly why I enjoy that act. But,
you were taught to do it. You were taught to do it, and you were told it was proper.
Well, I think it's a little more than that because. I'm a reasonably large man, and there is a sense of pride that comes along with making a woman feel safe, I suppose.
And it is actually part of men's job, in my opinion.
Indeed, and that's what I'm talking about with this idea of initiating young men into something which then they should feel some pride about.
And some obligation.
And some obligation. Those things come together.
Exactly.
But then if we live in a society that doesn't respect that.
Yeah, and actually puts you off. I mean, of course you're going to get, people are just, they're just human. They're just going to say, well, if it's not even appreciated, I won't do it. And actually, you know what, it's easier for me. And I want to say something about your thing about, asking people out and rejecting them nicely. It really does look very different from both sides. When... Like, it's not that I was some incredibly good-looking younger woman, but I had my fair share of being asked out. Men can be seriously clueless to whether it's reasonable to ask in the first place. Like, you've already signalled that you're really not interested, and whether to keep asking. Like, women are very reluctant to say really an open, not in a million years or leave me alone or something like that until it's got quite bad. Because again, the punch in the face is always the issue. And you just think like, could you just get a bit better at reading social cues? But I guess, teenage boys aren't naturally good at that.
They're not particularly good at it as well.
Teenage girls...
But they certainly do feel the humiliation of it.
Totally, and you don't see that as the girls. So that's what I'm saying is you see both sides,
Punch in the face isn't that common in reality, right?
But it's a big fear all the time. Like, I can feel it if I'm saying something to a man I don't know and he's big and he's too close to me and I want to say something like, get the fuck out of my face. I can't do that. I have to find another way around it. I have to, women go into this rictus smile. You see it and, you move away and you're frozen. Like, it's the same with them. There's this sort of minor sexual assault things on public transport, like, a man putting his hand under your skirt type thing or whatever. Women very rarely do what they say they will do, which is, shout and scream and punch and, stab his hand and point to the pervert and things. Women freeze. So, it's not easy either way, I suppose, is what I'm saying. But I also just don't think that it's very realistic to expect either sex to be very good at it as a teenager.
Well, that's why I'm saying that maybe they need some help from older men for boys and older women for girls to actually help them with
here's
that.
How you can do it. Yeah,
that's right. And I've thought about this a lot in terms of sex education and socializing young men and women. And I can see a place for, especially with the younger teenagers, having single sex classes at that point.
Absolutely.
But then also as they get older, bringing them together to have fairly open discussions about what it's like to be a young man approaching a woman or a young woman being approached and how that feels.
When the young woman decides that she would quite like to do the approaching for once.
Well, and that of course also should be on the table, right? And but nonetheless, it tends to still be the case that
I'm not sure, but yes, I mean, it's all on dating apps now.
Well, I mean, from what I hear, actually, they're not approaching one another at all anymore.
Yes.
Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, but I did want to get on. We're going to get back to the trans thing per se, and just talk briefly. I mean, I've got a lot of notes here. We're not going to be able to cover all of this at all, but so it seems like we're winning the war in the UK in terms of legislation, in terms of change in medical services, like the Tavistock Clinic, the CAS review. Also, maybe in terms of public perception. I wonder what you think in your time here of what's going on in New Zealand. We had Posey Parker visit a few years ago where she was kind of bracked, had a can of tomato juice poured over her head. At the moment, we have Rex Landy in court, who's charged under the Harmful Digital Communications Act for saying things about trans issues on social media. There's also a few pieces of law that have passed in the past few years in New Zealand. The Law Commission review came out this year, adding gender identity as a protected grounds for discrimination.
Recommending that it be added.
Yep. We had self-ID for birth certificates by statutory declaration only come in a few years ago. Conversion Practices Prohibition Legislation Act 2022. Some have argued could be used against parents trying to detrans their kids or to discourage their kids from transitioning. So what do you think, coming from the UK where maybe the tide is turning, what do you think the situation is like here now in New Zealand?
So your legal situation is much worse. I mean, the conversion therapy absolutely is used to terrify parents and any responsible clinician. It basically enforces the gender affirming model. You're still handing out puberty blockers left, right and centre. I think you're one of the world's highest prescribers, if not the highest, compared per capita.
Our Ministry of Health, not anymore, but at one point said in very bold letters, puberty blockers are safe and reversible.
Yeah, I mean, so the NHS said that, but it stopped saying it years ago. I mean, we have totally banned puberty blockers, both public and private prescriptions. They're just unlawful for gender use in the UK. And that's because they're dangerous and they don't do what the lobbyists said they did, which is to improve children's mental health and improve their gender dysphoria. Those are false claims. What they do is they stop children from growing up healthily into being adults, and they lock in their gender distress. So yeah, your conversion therapy law, your self-ID, and I even think your speech laws are worse than ours in the UK. So you're
really, I'm surprised by that one. I mean,
we fought off an enhancement of the hate speech laws a few years ago.
I know, but this vilification stuff online, that's pretty bad. And the mixed, and I've just been watching the Lava case, and there was draconian reporting restrictions. A very experienced journalist of several decades, Jenny Ruth, was refused right to report, and I attended, and I was told. I mean, I applied to sit in to get the paperwork and so on, and I was told I could sit only in the public gallery, and you're not allowed to take notes in the public gallery.
So this is you have in the courts.
Justice.
I think that's right, but I would.
No, but it's not true. I talked to other journalists. Jenny Ruth has been sitting in whenever the media thing is full. She's been sitting there when she wants. She sits in the public gallery and takes notes. I talked to a few other journalists there for the closing arguments yesterday, and they said that they were foreign journalists who sat where they liked and took notes whenever they wanted.
Yes.
Did they say that the reason was that you weren't a registered journalist in New Zealand?
Yes, but I'm talking about other non-registered journalists.
Yeah,
other foreign correspondents. Jenny doesn't register. So this is there as a power that the courts can use when they want, and they do when they don't want scrutiny. Open justice is such an important part of getting
You're
justice.
dead right. I think our courts are terrible like that, and they're terrible in some other ways as well. But I would argue on a broader front, the UK speech environment is very bad.
It is
when
bad.
When you've got cops knocking on people's doors and saying
In
fact, yours wasn't even a non-crime hatens,
right.
and it was apparent conviction behind the scenes.
Yeah,
or
well,
something.
I wasn't convicted, and it's important to say that
Right.
because I do not have a criminal record,
No,
and I said so when I applied for my
visa. You were
visa
accused
here.
of a crime that was
I
a
was
formal
accused
charge, and it did only.
It never turned into a charge. They never even notified
so what
me.
was it?
It was this parallel reporting system for hate crimes, where they don't even tell you about it. They just write it down.
How do they establish that it was in fact a hate crime if they're recording
No, they
it?
don't establish it at all. It's just an allegation, but they don't call it an allegation.
So does it have any legal status?
Yes, it's on the blooming police national database, and it's got my name against it, and it will turn up. It's not my criminal record, but it will turn up if I have to do an enhanced check.
Security check or something.
Isn't there this
certain
principle in Western legal systems that you're meant to be innocent until proven guilty?
know.
There's meant to be some kind of
No, it's
process to establish whether...
This is our worst bit. This is the worst bit
And
of
also
our law,
people
and
being thrown in jail for silly tweets.
Yeah, it's egregious, but it's so clearly ripe for a decent legal challenge. And I personally am legally challenging this. But I think that's the worst thing that we're still doing. I think you've got 4 or 5 things that are really bad. The self-ID and the conversion therapy bill are terrible.
I agree with those and with you on that.
Yeah.
I would say, as important an issue as that is, it's one issue. I think the broader speech. What I'm saying is, I think the broader speech environment in New Zealand is not as bad as it is in the UK because we don't have people thrown in jail for tweets.
But you've got no media reporting now. We've got loads. What I would say precisely
we've
is
got
that
a moribund media too.
You're 6 years behind us. I would say that the Lava case is the exact correlate of my Maya Forstater's case in 2019. There was no media coverage of that too.
I mean, my concern is that our courts are so bad that they might not actually get us out of it the way they have in England.
Yeah, I mean, I worry about that too. Small countries have a much harder time with, getting the talent to run a robust judiciary, but also robust media. I mean, I'm Irish. I'm not trying to say this about New Zealand. I'm saying about my own country. I hope that your more senior judges aren't as crazy. Oh, yeah, by the way, having a human rights tribunal at all is a terrible idea. They should just go. We don't have them. That really helps. Why? What is it for? Human rights are either in the law or they're not. And if they're in the law, there should be avenues.
This is a different discussion. The idea of rights as such, we need to define really carefully.
True, but there's a human rights framework which creates obligations on duty bearers.
Yeah, I prefer to distinguish entitlements from rights and say rights basically pertain to things that shouldn't be done to you. In other words, you shouldn't have your speech interfered with or your right to associate with other people or to refrain from associating with them interfered with, whereas entitlements are things that should be given to you by, presumably the state.
But fine. But, even then, like if you've got the rights in your law, it bites on somebody. Who is it who isn't to interfere? What is to happen when it is interfered with? And that's my point, is that, I have the right to do a whole load of things that I just can't actually get to stick. But I have rights that I can get to stick because somebody's the duty bearer in the case. And I just don't see what a human rights tribunal has to do with that. Like, who is the duty bearer and what's my case against them? Like, as far as I'm concerned, and I mean, I've argued this in a legal letter to my home police force, they have infringed upon my human rights by recording this. They've actually infringed on the Data Protection Act as well. I've written that down and I want satisfaction and I will go to court if they don't give it to me. It's not a human rights tribunal issue, even though I'm talking about my rights.
Right.
There's a duty bearer and they didn't fulfill their duties and I'm going to bloody well sue them for it.
And it shows how appalling it is in a way because, I mean, you to some extent have a profile, you have some people behind you and presumably some resources that you can use to do this.
And legal knowledge.
There must be lots and lots of people who don't have any of that who are affected by this kind of thing.
And I didn't even know about this until the guy who reported me, he was cross that I wasn't actually prosecuted. And so he applied for judicial review of the decision not to prosecute me. And I didn't, I literally didn't know my name was sitting there, a little unexploded landmine if I ever needed to apply for the sort of job that you need those checks for, until I got all the paperwork and saw to my astonishment this ridiculous false claims about me, absurd. And there was this brilliant bit in it, the first police officer to investigate, like he wrote it down and he said, well, there's no evidence for any of this. I suggest no further actioning it. That decision was reviewed and sent back to him saying, there is no evidence that it isn't true.
What?
I know,
So
complete
they don't
reversal.
understand one of the basic
Complete
principles
reversal.
of law. Yeah.
And that was a very senior person. I looked him up, more than 20 years experience and a specialist job of reviewing decisions to no further action. And so then the junior PC plod decided that his best course of action was to write it down. So that whole system has got to go, but I think it's ready to topple. Like Graham Linehan, how it was the same person reported him. It was the same ridiculous system that was used, except he was actually also dragged in for an interview. They're no further actioning that. They're saying that they're looking at on-crime hate incidents again. I reckon we can knock that right over. But, the broad thing I would say is you're 6 years behind, dating Lava and Maya Forstater's case identically. They've played out so similarly. They're about exactly the same thing, which is just the principle that you're allowed to talk about the fact that there are two sexes. It's not about, and this particular man can't come into my changing room right now. Thanks very much. And we're there now. We're at the tell that man to get out stage in the UK. So if you're 6 years behind, what do you learn from us? Well, you got to take these test cases. You got to go around your moribund mainstream media. There's a flourishing ecosystem of new media. You've got to use those newsletters, those email lists, those podcasts, etc., etc. You've got to raise public awareness, because the other thing that we've learned is that the more people know about this, the less they like it. We've seen unprecedented falls in every age group and both sexes in support for the trans agenda. Every question you can ask, do you think men should be allowed to, like in their language, 10 to 20 percentage points falls in the last 8 years. A majority of people now don't even think you should be allowed to get a gender recognition certificate in the UK. And that's young people. They're still keener on it, but it's falling just as much.
Interesting. Okay, maybe the last question then is, if the tide really is turning and we're going to go back to a sort of less crazy world, do you have any concerns that we're going to go too far and that we're going to erode some sort of genuine liberal rights? Like, are we going to lose the ability of people, if they do actually, say I decide, I go through a kind of deep introspective process, I decide I want to be known as Sheila and wear a wig, I want to say to people my pronouns are she, her, maybe I want to get surgery. Do you think those things are still going to be allowed?
I mean, I think the surgery will probably be allowed in the steady state. The surgery will be allowed as extreme cosmetic surgery, which is what it is. And, that means that the people doing it should get themselves bloody good liability insurance, because the rate of regret for that sort of extreme body modification is high.
And the possibility of it going badly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, these are not good operations. There's a very big downside, like very big risks to them. But also, you wouldn't do it to children. You wouldn't suggest sell it, you wouldn't fund it publicly, and you wouldn't say that it gave you any changed rights. Yeah. So you can do your Sheila cosplay if you want, but other people can say to you, when you say, I want you to refer to me as a woman, they can say, no, sorry, no can do, and you can't use the women's toilets at work. So that's the steady state on medical issues for trans people, and also free speech issues, I think. It becomes a fringe belief mixed with extreme body modification. It gets out of schools, gets out of public healthcare systems. And then the backlash, like the overcorrection that I'm really worried about is women's rights, or sort of like a kind of anti-feminism, people saying this is all feminism going wrong and not recognising the role of male fetish in driving all of this, and also against LGBT people. So we're seeing acceptance of gay people and gay marriage in America has fallen quite a lot. And I think that's because of the forced teaming between the T and the LGB. People think LGBT rights means that, men can compete in women's sports and perverts can come into your daughter's bathroom. Well, they're going to dislike the whole LGBT thing then. Even
though the T is completely different than the LGB part. Yeah. And I think it's been terrible for young gay people because too many of them have been told, I would say gay boys that they're actually really girls, or, gay girls that they're actually really boys, and in some cases with the tragic consequences of being put on these drugs and given surgery.
But if you look at who's supporting it, and this is kind of another version of your thing about feminism to me, like obviously gay people have many different opinions, but 100% nearly of their lobby groups are all in on the trans stuff. All the organisations that were set up to lobby for LGB are now LGBT. And there are just a few insurgent new groups like LGBT Alliance in the UK, like LAVA, the Lesbian Action for Visibility Aotearoa, who took this court case, that are saying the opposite, and they are shunned by their own community. So that's the biggest thing that I'm worried about, is that gay people will suffer the backlash.
Okay. Well, Joyce, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks indeed,
Thank
Helen.
you.
It's been terrific.